across the harsh deserts of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates coiled like twin silver serpents, there rose a city so radiant that even time itself seemed to pause at its gates. They called it Babylon. From afar, its sapphire-colored walls glittered beneath the sun, towering as if to touch the sky. Within, the hum of markets filled the air. Incense drifted upward from the temple of Marduk. And somewhere in the distance, a bard's voice carried the tale of a kingdom that once dared to be eternal. Babylon was never just a city, it was a statement. Here, humanity first carved law into stone to bind society together. Here, astronomers read the heavens by night, while scribes pressed clay into writing and artisans fired bricks into palaces that gleamed with otherworldly beauty. Long before Greece, long before Rome, Babylon stood defiant, a challenge to every civilization yet to come. And if you've ever played Age of Empires, you'll know Babylon was never the fastest to rush the battlefield. But give it time, and it became unstoppable. Walls unbreakable, technology unmatched, defenses that could turn back entire armies. So too in reality. They were not the most reckless of warriors, but they were the most patient of builders. They knew how to endure, how to wait, and how to leave behind a legacy no conqueror could erase. So step with me through the Ishtar Gate, onto the gleaming processional way, and listen to the story of a kingdom that once made the world stand in awe. This is Babylon, the legend between two rivers. Before Babylon, there was Sumer, the first great experiment of humanity, where clay tablets carried the earliest whispers of writing, and the gods of the sky and storm reigned over mud-brick temples. But history is not a still pond. It is a river that flows, sometimes slow, sometimes in torrents. As centuries passed, the power of Sumer waned, its cities left in the shadows of their own ziggurats. And in that shifting tide of time, another city began to emerge, a new heir to Mesopotamia's promise. That city was Babylon. Its fortune was written not only by kings or generals, but by the silent, ceaseless labor of two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. These rivers were no gentle streams. They came with tempests, swelling with snowmelt from the mountains far to the north. In their rage, they destroyed homes, swallowed villages, and left behind wastelands of silt. But in their gift, they carried the essence of life itself. Black, fertile soil richer than any treasure, capable of feeding tens of thousands. To live between these rivers was to gamble with chaos, but also to reach for greatness. The Babylonians learned early that survival meant mastery. They cut the earth with canals, digging long arteries that carried water into thirsty fields. They raised levees to contain the floods and reservoirs to store the bounty of spring. In these labors, every hand had its place. Farmers guiding oxen through the muck, children patting mud into walls, overseers counting rations on clay tablets. Civilization here was not born in marble halls, but in the sweat of peasants, in the rhythm of irrigation ditches, in the daily reconciliation between nature's fury and man's need. Imagine the scene at dawn. The rising sun turning the Euphrates into a river of gold. Men driving wooden plows through soil so dark it seemed alive. Women weaving baskets to carry the first shoots of barley. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and reed fires. And above it all, the temples loomed, where priests marked the movements of the stars and proclaimed which day was fit for planting. Life was fragile, yes, but also ordered, measured, even scientific in its struggle against uncertainty. It is no accident that law and astronomy were born here, in the land between rivers. For to govern floods is to understand patterns. To survive chaos is to impose order. In the mud of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians learned the first lesson of civilization, that man is not master of nature, but its partner and rival, forever negotiating terms. If you have ever played Age of Empires, you may sense a faint echo of this ancient struggle. Choosing the rivers map, you quickly learn that water is both ally and adversary. It feeds your villagers with fish, it offers safe trade routes, it nourishes your economy. Yet it also hems you in, shapes your strategy, forces you to adapt. To thrive, you must learn to live with the rivers, not against them. So too did Babylon. Its strength was not in conquering the rivers, but in harmonizing with their unpredictable will. As the centuries unfolded, the settlements along the Euphrates grew into towns, and the towns into a city of brick and law. Babylon did not erupt onto the world stage in a single instant, like the flash of a sword. It unfolded slowly, like the patient course of its rivers. Each flood season carried not only destruction, but renewal. Each harvest bound the people closer to their land, to their gods, and to each other. Out of mud huts rose temples, out of farming villages rose walls, out of the chaos of water and earth rose the order of a city that would one day command the world's attention. And perhaps this is the paradox of Babylon, that its greatness began not with conquest, but with cultivation. It was not the clash of armies that gave Babylon its birth, but the furrows of the plow, the weaving of canals, the endless negotiation between human will and the rivers that could both bless and destroy. From the struggle against floodwaters came not only food, but also mathematics to measure fields, calendars to track seasons, laws to resolve disputes. The rivers demanded order, and Babylon gave it form. When we look back across the millennia, the rise of Babylon teaches us a quiet but profound truth, that civilization begins wherever man learns to endure. The Tigris and Euphrates did not merely nourish Babylon, they shaped its soul. To this day, their waters whisper through the ruins, carrying the memory of the first city that dared to tame them. Civilizations are rarely built by conquest alone. Cities rise and fall, armies win and lose. But the thread that binds a people together is not only the sword, but the rules by which they live. After Babylon had mastered its rivers, it still needed something greater than fertile fields and sturdy dikes. It needed a soul. And in its moment of searching, there emerged a king whose vision stretched beyond battlefields, Hammurabi. Unlike the marauding warlords who came before him, Hammurabi was more than a soldier. He was, in truth, an architect of society. He fought when he had to, expanding Babylon's sway over Mesopotamia. But his true legacy was not measured in miles of territory, but in lines of stone. For Hammurabi carved into history something eternal, the first great codification of law. Imagine the scene. A massive stele of black basalt, taller than a man, polished to a dark sheen. At its crown, a sculpted image. Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god of justice, receiving the rod and ring of authority. Below, inscribed in careful cuneiform, were nearly 300 laws. They ranged from commerce to marriage, from theft to wages, from irrigation disputes to crimes of violence. Life in Babylon, with all its complexity, had been etched into permanence. For the first time, justice was no longer the whim of a ruler or the rage of a mob. It was written, visible, carved into stone for all to see. The weak could appeal to it. The strong could be restrained by it. Hammurabi's laws were not perfect. Many were harsh, reflecting a world still governed by an eye for an eye. Yet within their severity lay a seed of civilization. The principle that society must stand on order, not chaos. Consider how radical this was. In neighboring cities, power often passed like the seasons, each new ruler tearing down what the old had built. But in Babylon, Hammurabi ensured continuity. A farmer knew what penalty awaited if he neglected a canal. A merchant knew what contract bound his trade. Even a laborer, hired to tend the fields, could find in the laws the assurance of fair wages. By codifying justice, Hammurabi gave Babylon something sturdier than walls. He gave it predictability, the trust that tomorrow would follow rules written today. And here, our game-loving friends might see the parallel. In Age of Empires, one can rush into early battles, gamble everything on cavalry charges or archer swarms. But the wise player invests first in stability, researching masonry, strengthening architecture, laying foundations before fortresses. That is what Hammurabi achieved. His laws were not glamorous like a wonder, nor fierce like a chariot charge. But they were the upgrades that made everything else possible. With them, Babylon could endure where others collapsed. This was Hammurabi's genius, to see that empires rise not just by conquest, but by the quiet discipline of law. His stele was more than a monument, it was a spine. And with that spine, Babylon could stand upright through centuries of storms. Yet even the most disciplined society requires a stage on which to live. The rivers gave sustenance, the laws gave structure. But the people of Babylon still needed a place to gather, to pray, to trade, to marvel at the work of their own hands. The legacy of Hammurabi would not only be remembered in words carved into stone, but in bricks fired by flame, glazed in brilliant blue, raised into walls and towers that would dazzle the ancient world. And so, from law we turn to architecture. From the cold permanence of basalt, we step into the radiant glow of enamel. The city of Babylon was about to reveal itself, not merely as a seat of power, but as one of the most breathtaking creations of the human spirit. That is the story of our next chapter, the city of fired brick and blue glaze. If Hammurabi's laws were the bones of Babylon, then its architecture was the skin, glowing, resplendent, unforgettable. For a civilization is not remembered only by its decrees or its victories, but by the cities it leaves behind, the stones and colors that whisper its soul long after voices fall silent. And Babylon, above all, mastered the art of turning earth into immortality. Let us walk in imagination through the processional way, that grand avenue which cut through the heart of the city. It was paved with large stone slabs, polished by the feet of countless citizens and visiting envoys. On either side, walls of deep blue shimmered in the sunlight. Upon them, rows of lions strode in proud relief. The lion, sacred to Ishtar, goddess of love and war. Each figure was not painted, but born from fire itself. Bricks glazed and baked until their color seemed eternal. This was not the dusty clay of mere utility. This was clay transfigured into beauty. Ahead loomed the Ishtar Gate, one of the most iconic portals ever raised by human hands. Its towers rose high, adorned with dragons of Marduk and bulls of Adad, their forms repeating in patterned rhythm across the luminous blue. The gate was both a fortress and a shrine, a threshold between the mundane and the divine. To walk through it was not simply to enter a city. It was to step into a cosmos where gods and men shared the same streets. This was Babylon's genius, the marriage of engineering and spirituality. Every brick had been baked in kilns, every glaze prepared with minerals that once fused could resist time and weather. To the Babylonians, building was not merely practical, it was sacred. The city itself became a temple, its walls proclaiming myth, its streets echoing liturgy. The king's palace rose nearby, vast and intricate, a labyrinth of courtyards and halls. Yet even there, the glory was not only political, but cosmic. For the palace was an axis between heaven's favor and the people's prosperity. Here we must pause and admire the sheer innovation. Other civilizations built with stone, carving what the earth already offered. Babylon dared to take common clay, the simplest, most humble of materials, and transform it through fire into something radiant. In modern words, Babylon invented its own skin, a signature texture unlike any other. It was as if the very soil of Mesopotamia, once tamed by canals and laws, had now been transfigured into art. Think, then, of how this echoes in our games. In Age of Empires, there comes a point when armies and farms are not enough. To prove supremacy, one builds a wonder, a monument that declares permanence, daring opponents to challenge it. In reality, Babylon achieved this centuries before the concept of wonder had even been named. Its gates, its temples, its ziggurats were the wonders of their age, commanding awe not through swords, but through splendor. Just as in the game, such works were not mere decoration, they were strategy. A city so magnificent could inspire loyalty, attract trade, and terrify enemies. To assault Babylon was to risk not only military defeat, but sacrilege itself. But these bricks of fire and glaze carried more than political weight. They revealed something deeper about the Babylonian spirit, the longing to make the transient permanent. Floods might wash the fields, kings might fall, but the city's colors, deep blue, golden, and white, would outlast them all. To walk those streets was to feel eternity painted into the walls. And yet, as radiant as the city stood, it was only a prelude. For in time, Babylon would attempt something even greater, a creation so bold, so mysterious, that ancient travelers swore it must have touched the heavens. Not a gate, not a temple, but a garden, green in the desert, hanging as if by miracle. A queen's dream, a king's devotion, and humanity's eternal defiance of nature. Thus we leave behind the fired bricks and sacred blue, and step into the myth of verdant terraces. The story of Babylon now rises into legend, the hanging gardens and the power of a queen. If the Ishtar Gate dazzled the eyes with fire and stone, then the hanging gardens enchanted the imagination with life itself. To walk through Babylon was to see the city proclaiming, "We have mastered the earth." But to gaze upon its gardens, terraces of green in the heart of desert, was to hear Babylon whisper, "We have mastered nature." Legend tells us that Nebuchadnezzar II, the warrior king, built the gardens for his queen, Amytis of Media. She came from a land of mountains, forests, and rushing rivers. In the flat and arid plains of Mesopotamia, she languished, homesick. To comfort her, the king commanded that a wonder be raised. Terraces stacked like steps to the sky, filled with trees, flowers, and flowing water. What greater display of power could there be than to recreate an entire landscape within the walls of a city? What greater gesture of love than to bring mountains to the plain? Here, myth and archaeology dance together. Ancient Greek writers like Strabo and Diodorus describe the gardens in vivid detail, though no Babylonian tablet has yet confirmed their existence. Excavations have found grand vaulted structures near the Euphrates, with sophisticated systems of irrigation, suggesting that Babylonian engineers indeed experimented with elevated gardens. Whether the hanging gardens stood exactly as the legend claims, or whether they are a romantic memory of Assyrian terraced gardens at Nineveh, does not diminish their symbolic force. What matters is that generations believed Babylon capable of defying its environment. In history, as in love, sometimes belief is as enduring as stone. Imagine the feat. Water, drawn from the Euphrates, had to be lifted through hidden machinery, perhaps chain pumps or screw-like devices, then cascaded down from terrace to terrace. Trees took root in deep layers of soil laid upon stone, their roots held in by bitumen and led to resist seepage. Flowers bloomed in a rainbow over baked earth, an impossible oasis in the heart of the city. In the scorching summer heat of Mesopotamia, the gardens must have shimmered like a miracle, a living promise that Babylon's king commanded not only armies, but the seasons themselves. But let us not mistake this wonder as mere romance. The Hanging Gardens, whether legend or reality, were politics in bloom. In building them, Nebuchadnezzar declared to the world, Babylon could afford to waste no effort on luxury, to bend rivers for beauty, to raise mountains for love. Power is not only measured in conquest, it is measured in confidence. A ruler who can command resources to create paradise amid the desert announces more than wealth. He announces permanence. So too in Age of Empires, a wonder is not only a path to victory, it is a proclamation. I have reached the summit. Defeat me if you dare. The Hanging Gardens served the same purpose. They were not just terraces of green, but a living wonder, a symbol that Babylon had ascended above mere survival into majesty. Just as in the game, enemies could rally against the wonder, but their very opposition proved the city's supremacy. For the queen, the gardens were a gift of love. For the king, they were an act of legitimacy. For the people, they were pride made visible. And for posterity, they became the most poetic of Babylon's achievements, even more enduring in memory than walls or gates. Every traveler who wrote of them, whether they had truly seen them or not, left behind testimony that Babylon was not merely powerful, but enchanting. And perhaps this is the deepest truth of all. Civilizations do not live forever by swords or fortresses, but by symbols that stir the imagination. The Hanging Gardens remind us that politics is also theater, and that rulers who understand beauty wield a subtler, more enduring power. For while conquests crumble and laws fade into dust, the image of terraces rising into heaven continues to haunt the mind, as fresh as when it was first told. From bricks and laws we have come, to gardens and love. Yet Babylon's greatness did not rest solely on the strength of its kings or the devotion of its queens. Beneath its walls, within its temples, another force stirred, the quiet power of knowledge. For Babylon would not only bend clay and water to its will, it would bend the stars. Thus, as we leave the lush terraces, we look upward to the heavens and enter the next chapter of Babylon's legacy, science, astronomy, and the power of knowledge. From the terraces of the Hanging Gardens, our eyes are drawn upward, not only to the greenery, but to the vast canopy of stars. To the Babylonians, the heavens were not silent. They were a library. While kings built walls and queens nurtured gardens, another class of men, robed in ritual, armed not with swords but with styluses, carved into clay the greatest inheritance of Babylon, knowledge. It is difficult for us today, with clocks on our wrists and calendars in our pockets, to imagine the world without time. Yet Babylon gave humanity its first firm grasp of it. In the temples that crowned ziggurats, priests watched the heavens night after night, measuring the shadows cast by the sun, charting the wandering of planets, noting the dance of the moon. With reed pens pressed into wet clay, they fixed eternity into tablets. What began as omens for kings, Venus is bright, the harvest will prosper, slowly became data, prediction, the foundations of science. Stand, for a moment, beside one of these astronomer priests atop a ziggurat. The desert wind cools the night. Torches flicker below, but above, the sky is infinite and exact. He marks a point of light, compares it to last month's position, consults a table compiled by his fathers, and scratches another symbol into clay. In those wedges of cuneiform lies not only prophecy, but pattern. Eclipses could be foreseen, months could be measured, and the year itself divided with uncanny accuracy. It was in Babylon that time took shape, and where humanity learned to order the chaos of the heavens. Mathematics followed as its natural ally. The Babylonians built on the Sumerian invention of the sexagesimal system, base 60. And from it came marvels, the 360 degrees of the circle, the 12 hours of day and 12 of night, the minutes and seconds we still use. They calculated square roots, devised formulas for areas and volumes, even offered the earliest glimpses of algebra. A clay tablet known as Plimpton 322, dating to nearly 4,000 years ago, lists what appear to be Pythagorean triples, proof that long before Greece, Babylon was already exploring the laws of geometry. Yet knowledge was not merely abstract. It was power. By charting the heavens, the priests could fix calendars, regulate planting and harvest, and dictate festivals. In a land where rivers determined life, to predict the flooding of the Euphrates was to master survival itself. Science here was not detached inquiry, but a tool of empire, a means to command both nature and men. We should not romanticize these achievements as purely modern. To the Babylonians, astronomy was bound to religion. Stars were not distant suns, but divine messengers. Calculations served to interpret the will of the gods, and mathematics underpinned rituals as much as engineering. Yet therein lies a deeper lesson. Science was born not in detachment, but in devotion. Humanity's first scientists were priests, and their laboratories were temples. It was reverence that taught men to measure. The comparison to Age of Empires is irresistible. In the game, Babylonian players are known for their powerful technology tree. Strong archery, advanced fortifications, superior economic upgrades. Unlike civilizations that rely on brute military force, Babylon thrives by investing in tech early, by laying foundations that pay off in the long war. This is no accident of design, it mirrors history. Babylon endured not only by walls and armies, but by the quiet power of scribes and scholars. Its upgrades were real. Better calendars, better architecture, better medicine, better ways to bend nature into service. What does it mean that this ancient empire, whose kings boasted of conquest, is remembered as much for its scientists as its soldiers? Perhaps it is proof that civilizations do not live by force alone. Armies may win battles, but knowledge wins centuries. The sword can cut down a man. The stylus can shape a millennium. When we look back upon Babylon, it is tempting to see only its bricks and its gardens. But the more enduring legacy lies in numbers, in symbols pressed into clay, in the patient observation of stars across generations. These men, who stared into the heavens with devotion, left us the gift of time itself. Every clock we read, every degree we measure, every calendar we turn, carries the imprint of Babylon's priests. From gardens of stone and green, we have ascended to gardens of thought. Babylon not only conquered deserts, it conquered ignorance. And yet, No civilization stands forever on intellect alone. Ideas may guide, but armies defend. As knowledge ripened in the temples, soldiers drilled in the courtyards, and generals plotted by the rivers. For the empire that looked to the stars still needed to command the earth. And so, from the tablets of astronomers, we now turn to the shields of warriors to see how Babylon's armies moved between desert and river, and how power was won not only by knowledge, but by the sword. From the temple terraces where priests measured the heavens, the sound of chanting would sometimes be drowned by another rhythm. The tramp of feet, the neigh of horses, the rattle of bronze. For knowledge alone does not preserve a kingdom. The Babylonians, masters of astronomy and mathematics, also needed mastery of the battlefield. Between desert sands and the life-giving rivers of the Euphrates and Tigris, war was as constant as the seasons. Babylon was not isolated in peace. To the north rose the Assyrians, hardened warriors who lived for conquest. To the east, the Elamites, fierce and restless. Even within Mesopotamia, city vied against city. And so, as the scribes carved symbols into clay, the generals trained men for war. The Babylonian army became a mirror of its land. A blend of desert swiftness, riverine discipline, and the ingenuity of a people who had learned to build walls against both flood and foe. The core of this army was its infantry. Men who bore tall rectangular shields of woven reed reinforced with leather, or heavier panels faced with bronze. Behind these barriers, soldiers advanced in disciplined ranks, spears thrusting forward like a living wall. They were not reckless skirmishers. They were patient, methodical, a force that ground down the enemy step by step. Babylon knew that survival in Mesopotamia was not won by sudden raids, but by endurance. Yet the Babylonians were not without speed. Their light cavalry, often recruited from desert tribes, carried bows and javelins, striking swiftly before melting back into the dunes. These horsemen were the eyes and ears of the army, harassing supply lines, ambushing scouts, and vanishing into the horizon before heavy infantry could respond. Against the Assyrians, who themselves mastered cavalry, Babylonian riders fought not by brute strength, but by agility, exploiting terrain, stretching battles into wars of attrition. But the true pride of Babylon lay in its chariots. To see one was to witness both engineering and terror. 2 or sometimes 3 horses, yoked to a platform of wood and bronze, its wheels reinforced with metal, its sides adorned with sacred emblems. In battle, these chariots thundered across the plains, scattering infantry before them, arrows raining from archers mounted behind the reinsman. If the infantry was the shield of Babylon, the chariots were its hammer. Many chronicles tell of battles where the sudden charge of chariots decided the day, breaking the enemy line in a single, furious strike. Imagine, for a moment, the clash with Assyria. The Assyrians prided themselves on cruelty and fear. Their armies marched with iron discipline, their kings boasting of flayed captives. Against such an enemy, Babylon could not simply rely on walls. A battle unfolds near the river. The Babylonian infantry forms its shield wall, holding firm against the brutal push of Assyrian spearmen. Light cavalry dart along the flanks, harassing with arrows, buying time. Then, as the Assyrians press forward, the chariots wheel into motion, surging from behind the line, smashing into the exposed side of the enemy. Dust rises, bronze glitters, and suddenly the proud Assyrian advance falters. Victory in Mesopotamia was rarely total, but survival against such foes was itself triumph. This was the paradox of Babylon's military power. Unlike nomadic peoples who lived by conquest, Babylon was above all a city, a garden among deserts. Its greatness rested not only on expansion, but on defense. The city walls, faced with baked brick and crowned with towers, were as much weapons as soldiers. Enemies might ravage the countryside, but the heart of Babylon was a fortress. Time and again, besiegers found themselves exhausted before those unyielding gates. Here, the analogy with Age of Empires is striking. Babylon in the game is not a civilization that rushes in the early ages, overwhelming foes with sheer speed like the Huns. Instead, it excels in the late game, a powerhouse of technology, economy, and defense. Strong walls, superior archery, powerful upgrades. The Babylonian player thrives by outlasting the opponent, turning patience into inevitability. History reflects the same lesson. Babylon rarely sought reckless conquest. It built, endured, and when forced to fight, it relied on preparation and resilience. But war in Babylon was never detached from the larger rhythm of civilization. Victories on the battlefield secured the temples, the libraries, the gardens. Every chariot built meant taxes collected, every spear forged meant harvests safeguarded. And in return, the wealth of Babylon funded more soldiers, more fortifications, more campaigns. It was a circle of survival. Knowledge sustaining war, war protecting knowledge. And yet, for all its chariots and spearmen, Babylon's armies were more than flesh and bronze. They were fueled by something deeper, the conviction that the gods themselves marched with them. Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash, these were not distant deities, but living presences, invoked in every battle, painted on every shield. To fight for Babylon was to fight for the divine order of the universe itself. Thus, as we leave the battlefield, we must look beyond dust and blood, toward the temples that gave warriors their courage. For the next chapter of Babylon's story belongs not to weapons, but to faith, to the myths, the gods, and the power of belief that bound the people together, and without which no army could stand. If the mighty walls of Babylon were the bones and sinews of the city, then religion was its soul. From the earliest days, the people of Mesopotamia lifted their eyes to the star-studded heavens and did not see distant suns, but living gods watching, judging, and guiding them. Among the countless deities of the land between the rivers, two rose to supreme prominence in the Babylonian imagination: Marduk, lord of the cosmos, and Ishtar, radiant goddess of love, war, and vitality. The myths told of Marduk's titanic battle with Tiamat, the primordial dragon of chaos. With his net and storm, he struck her down, splitting her monstrous body to form heaven and earth. Out of this violence came order. From destruction, creation. From that day forward, Marduk was more than a god. He was the great cosmic king, the model for every Babylonian ruler who sought to turn chaos into civilization. When a monarch ascended the throne, he did not merely don the crown of Babylon. He took upon himself the title Shepherd of Marduk, the earthly reflection of divine authority. Beside him stood Ishtar, beautiful, fearsome, and deeply paradoxical. She was love in its most intoxicating form and war in its most merciless face. In the temples, her name was sung in hymns of fertility and passion. On the battlefield, her emblem, the lion, reminded foes that she could turn tenderness into ferocity in an instant. To worship Ishtar was to embrace the full spectrum of human existence: birth and death, peace and strife, intimacy and conquest. These gods did not live only in prayers. They lived in stone and clay, in the towering ziggurats that defined the Babylonian skyline. Each ziggurat was a man-made mountain rising out of the flat Mesopotamian plain, each tier drawing worshippers closer to heaven. The most famous of them all, Etemenanki, was said to have inspired the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel. It was not merely a temple, It was a statement of cosmic geography, declaring that Babylon was the axis of the world, the bridge between the realm of men and the dwelling of the gods. At sunrise, when the first light gilded its steps, pilgrims must have felt as though they were standing on the edge of eternity. Religion was not a private matter of faith. It was the engine of public life. Every year, in the spring, Babylon erupted into the grandeur of the Akitu festival, the New Year's celebration. For 12 days, the city became a stage where divine drama and royal politics intertwined. Statues of the gods were carried through the streets, hymns shook the air, and offerings filled the altars. The climax came when the king himself stood humbly before Marduk's statue. In a ritual both humbling and terrifying, the high priest stripped the king of his regalia, slapped him across the face, and demanded he confess his failings. Only when the god was appeased, only when the tears in the king's eyes showed sincerity, was the crown returned. In that moment, the mightiest man in Mesopotamia was reminded that he ruled not by his own will, but by the grace of heaven. This intertwining of faith and power was Babylon's secret weapon. Belief was not only a balm for the soul, it was a tool of empire. The ziggurats and festivals bound people together, forging unity from diversity. Soldiers marched not just for wages, but for the will of Marduk. Citizens obeyed laws not simply from fear of punishment, but from reverence to the gods who sanctioned them. In a world where loyalty could be fickle and alliances fragile, Babylon discovered that nothing was stronger than faith. Here, the parallel with Age of Empires becomes vivid. In the game, when you research the technology called faith, your monks can resist enemy conversions. Your people's belief becomes a shield stronger than steel. Babylon lived this reality 3,000 years before the tech tree was ever imagined. Their faith was their armor, their rituals, their strategy. Just as a player might invest in technologies that seem intangible but prove decisive, Babylon's rulers invested in the invisible but unbreakable bond of belief. Through gods and myths, through festivals and rituals, Babylon wrote its story in both heaven and earth. To understand the city is not only to study bricks and battles, but to feel the pulse of devotion that animated its people. The power of Babylon was never only in its armies or its walls. It was in the conviction that the gods themselves had chosen it as the navel of the world. And yet, as with all empires, belief could be a double-edged sword. The very gods that gave Babylon unity also made it vulnerable when fortune shifted. A drought, a defeat, an omen read unfavorably in the stars. All could shake confidence in the divine mandate. But for centuries, while the festivals rang out and the ziggurats gleamed in the sun, Babylon stood as the living theater of faith. Its destiny shaped not only by kings and armies, but by the immortal presence of its gods. For centuries, Babylon glimmered like a jewel set between the Tigris and the Euphrates. Its prosperity was not an accident of fate, but the result of deliberate ingenuity, a mastery of agriculture, commerce, and taxation that transformed the city into the beating heart of Mesopotamia. The empire thrived because its rulers understood that while soldiers might win battles, it was farmers, merchants, and scribes who sustained civilizations. The first pillar of this prosperity was the land itself. The rivers, though prone to destructive floods, were also sources of endless fertility. Through an intricate system of canals, dikes, and reservoirs, Babylonian engineers tamed the waters and turned the arid plain into a breadbasket. Grain was the empire's lifeblood. Barley and wheat fed armies and citizens alike, while surplus harvests became currency for trade. Herds of sheep and goats roamed the countryside, supplying wool, milk, and meat. Dates, harvested from towering palms, were sweet luxuries as well as vital staples. In the villages beyond the city walls, peasants worked tirelessly from sunrise to sunset, their sweat sustaining the grandeur of Babylon's palaces and temples. Yet agriculture alone could not have made Babylon the envy of the world. The city also became a nexus of trade. Caravans laden with goods arrived from every horizon: cedar wood from Lebanon, copper and tin from Anatolia, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and spices from Arabia. Babylon was both marketplace and melting pot, where accents mingled and foreign merchants haggled beneath the shade of monumental gates. The famed processional way, flanked by lions in glazed brick, was not merely a ceremonial road, but a living artery of commerce, pulsing with exchange. Gold and silver coins changed hands. Clay tablets recorded debts, contracts, and partnerships. In these tablets, we glimpse the earliest foundations of banking, where Babylonian scribes became the accountants of empire. Behind this prosperity stood the state's machinery of taxation. Farmers rendered a share of their harvest, merchants paid tariffs on their wares, and citizens contributed in labor or coin. Tribute from conquered territories swelled the royal treasury, funding the construction of temples, ziggurats, and those famed walls that made Babylon seem unconquerable. The system worked so long as it was balanced, when the wealth of the few was reinvested in the well-being of the many. But history whispers that in Babylon, as in every empire, shadows lengthened with prosperity. The first shadow was corruption. Wealth breeds temptation, and the scribes who kept accounts were not always saints. Officials siphoned grain from storehouses, inflated taxes for personal gain, or turned a blind eye to favored merchants. Over time, faith in fairness eroded, and resentment simmered among the common people. The second shadow was inequality. The elite, priests, nobles, wealthy traders, enjoyed luxury within palaces and mansions, dining on fine meats and imported wines. They draped themselves in embroidered garments, adorned with jewelry of gold and lapis. Meanwhile, the peasants bent their backs in the fields, vulnerable to drought, debt, and disease. A failed harvest could mean ruin. A borrowed seed loan could lead to bondage. Slavery, fed by conquest and debt, became an institution that hollowed the moral foundation of the state. The third shadow was stagnation. Prosperity bred complacency. While Babylon was still magnificent, it grew increasingly inward-looking, satisfied to bask in its own grandeur. Neighbors innovated in warfare, in administration, in mobility, while Babylon's bureaucracy often clung to tradition. The empire, once agile and ambitious, risked ossification. This mixture of prosperity and hidden weakness is not unfamiliar to players of Age of Empires. In the game, one can dominate early with strong walls, wonders, and booming economy. Yet if the economy is mismanaged, if villagers stop gathering or trade routes collapse, the mightiest empire crumbles when the imperial age dawns. Babylon mirrored this truth. Its walls and temples dazzled, its festivals resounded, but its economic and social foundations began to show cracks. The empire was rich but vulnerable, strong but brittle. And so, Babylon's story teaches that prosperity carries its own dangers. Wealth without justice breeds unrest. Grandeur without renewal breeds decline. The shadow always follows the light. For generations, Babylon's kings had balanced faith and force, trade and tribute. But as corruption deepened and inequality sharpened, the balance tilted. The same wealth that once made Babylon radiant also made it a tempting prize for outsiders. A city so alluring that no conqueror could resist. In the late days, Merchants still bustled in markets, priests still ascended ziggurats, scribes still etched contracts on clay. Life seemed to continue as always. But beneath the surface, the empire had entered its twilight. Like a great tree still bearing fruit though its roots rot unseen, Babylon's splendor concealed the decay that would soon invite the axe. For in the east, beyond the horizon, a new power stirred, a people hardened by the mountains of Persia, guided by a king of genius and ambition. His name was Cyrus, and under his banner, Babylon would soon face its final reckoning. It did not end in fire, nor in the thunder of collapsing walls. Babylon, the city that had once defied time and gods alike, met its end in silence. In 539 BC, when Cyrus the Great and his Persian army approached its monumental gates, the world expected a siege of epic proportions. For generations, poets and prophets had spoken of Babylon as impregnable. Its walls were said to be so thick that chariots could race along their tops. Its gates were clad in bronze, its rivers guarded by moats. Here was a city that no army could storm without bleeding itself dry. And yet, Babylon fell without a single arrow loosed in anger. The truth was far more tragic than any battlefield defeat. Inside the city, discontent simmered. The people had grown weary of kings who taxed them into poverty, of priests who enriched themselves while fields withered, of soldiers who served more as enforcers than protectors. The great prosperity of Babylon, once a source of pride, had become a gilded cage for the many and a banquet table for the few. Where there is no trust, even the mightiest walls are paper thin. Cyrus understood this better than anyone. He was not only a conqueror, but also a master of hearts and minds. Rather than promising fire and slaughter, he proclaimed liberation. He allowed exiled peoples to return to their homelands, respected local gods, and promised fairness in governance. To the Babylonians, weary of corruption and arrogance, the Persian king appeared not as an invader, but as a savior. When his army reached the gates, they did not meet resistance. Instead, the gates were opened from within. Babylon fell not to the sword, but to disillusionment. The soldiers of Cyrus marched through avenues once built for royal processions, past temples that had echoed with hymns to Marduk, into a city that surrendered not out of weakness, but out of despair with its rulers. The chroniclers of the time tell us that there was no battle, no massacre. Life continued almost as if nothing had changed. Markets opened the next morning, scribes still pressed wedges into clay, priests still chanted in their sanctuaries. But the throne was gone, the crown was gone, and with them, Babylon's independence. A millennium of ambition ended not in cataclysm, but in quiet resignation. And so Babylon teaches one of history's hardest truths. The strength of an empire is not measured only in walls, armies, or wealth, but in the loyalty of its people. The city that had once risen on the wings of faith and prosperity fell because it lost the trust of those who lived within its walls. When rulers forget that they govern not for themselves, but for their people, the gates of empire will swing open to any outsider who offers hope. Players of Age of Empires know this lesson too well. Sometimes you do not lose because your army is weak or your economy is poor. Sometimes you lose because you failed to keep your villagers safe, to sustain their trust, to protect the unseen bond between ruler and ruled. A single revolt, a single lapse of loyalty, can undo hours of careful play. Babylon's fall was exactly this, a game lost not by military defeat, but by the quiet betrayal of hearts and minds. Cyrus did not demolish Babylon. On the contrary, he honored its gods, preserved its temples, and allowed the city to remain a jewel within the Persian crown. Yet in that act of mercy lay the cruelest truth. Babylon survived, but no longer for itself. It lived on only as a province of another empire. Its name still whispered in awe, but its destiny no longer its own. For those who walked its streets after the fall, perhaps little seemed to change. But the soul of the city had shifted. Where once Babylon had ruled the world, it now served it. Where once it had dictated terms to kings, it now bowed to one. This was the fate of many empires before and after. Rome, Byzantium, even the kingdoms of our own modern age. Power erodes not from without, but from within. And when the people's faith dies, so too does the empire. Thus, the story of Babylon's fall is not merely a tale of ancient conquest, but a timeless parable. Strength without justice is brittle. Walls without loyalty are hollow. No empire, no matter how glorious, can endure once its people turn their hearts away. And so Babylon, once the queen of Mesopotamia, became a subject in the court of Cyrus the Great. Not with fire, not with ruin, but with the softest sound of all, the sound of gates opening and the silence of surrender. The ruins of Babylon still breathe. Walk today among the scattered foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's palaces, and you will not see the hanging gardens, nor the towering ziggurat that once brushed the heavens. Yet, in every fragment of glazed brick, every cuneiform tablet lying in quiet museums, Babylon speaks across 3,000 years. Its voice is not silenced by conquest. It is carried forward in symbols, myths, and memories that shape even our modern imagination. From the earliest wedge-shaped impressions pressed into clay, Babylon gifted the world one of humanity's greatest tools: writing. The cuneiform script, first etched for trade and law, grew into an instrument of science, poetry, and theology. With those strokes of reed-upon clay, the Babylonians mapped the stars, recorded eclipses, and charted the rhythm of time. To this day, when we speak of hours, minutes, and the 360 degrees of a circle, we unknowingly echo the mathematical genius of Mesopotamia. Writing was their weapon against oblivion, a weapon no army could conquer. Their art, too, endures. In Berlin's Pergamon Museum, the Ishtar Gate rises in restored majesty, its lapis blue tiles shimmering with lions, bulls, and dragons. Tourists stare in awe, not merely at the beauty of the gate, but at the realization that these bricks once framed the entrance to the mightiest city of its age. It is a reminder that the empires collapse. But beauty, when captured in stone and color, outlives kings. But Babylon's legacy does not rest only in archaeology. It lives in story. The Bible spoke of Babel and Belshazzar's feast, of pride punished and kings humbled. Western imagination has never ceased to paint Babylon as both wonder and warning. The city of gardens and astronomy, yet also the city of decadence and hubris. Hollywood has taken this duality and magnified it. Films from the silent epics of the 1920s to modern retellings cast Babylon as a stage for human ambition and divine judgment. To speak of Babylon even today is to invoke both splendor and downfall. And then there are the games. For players of Age of Empires, Babylon is not just a memory in stone, but a living civilization on the screen. Its tech tree echoes reality, strong in technology, durable in defense, thriving in the long game. Where other civilizations rush with cavalry or overwhelm with sheer force, Babylon rewards patience, planning, and the steady accumulation of knowledge. To play as Babylon is to feel history's lesson, that endurance, innovation, and belief often outlast brute speed or strength. The city may have fallen in life, but in strategy, it remains a contender, immortalized in digital battles across the world. This persistence in our culture, both scholarly and popular, testifies to Babylon's unusual power. Few empires endure as vividly in the collective memory. Egypt has its pyramids, Rome its legions. But Babylon has something more elusive, a myth, a symbol. To some, it is the warning against arrogance. To others, it is the beacon of learning, a civilization that sought to measure the cosmos. That duality, the glory and the caution, makes Babylon eternal. Perhaps this is why Babylon fascinates us in an age of skyscrapers and digital empires. Its story whispers of the heights humanity can reach, and of the abysses into which it can fall. The same hands that carved poetry also carved chains. The same rulers who built temples to gods also enslaved men and women. Babylon is a mirror, reflecting both our genius and our folly. And so, what is Babylon's true legacy? It is not merely the bricks in Berlin or the lines in the Bible. It is the idea that power is fragile, that no empire stands without trust, that beauty and wisdom endure where armies do not. In film, in scripture, in museum halls, in the glowing pixels of a game, Babylon endures as both triumph and tragedy. For in the end, Babylon teaches us this: the greatest strength is not found in walls or armies, but in knowledge and faith. Triumphant armies may enter through open gates, but words etched into clay last beyond millennia. Thrones may topple, but the idea of justice, of time, of cosmic order remains. Babylon is gone. Yet it is everywhere, etched into our hours, echoed in our stories, played on our screens, remembered in our hearts. Babylon has fallen, yes, but Babylon lives on. And that was the journey of Babylon, from glory to eternal legacy. If you also believe history is more than just dry pages, but a living story, please hit subscribe, drop a like and share to help me keep bringing more civilizations to life in this series. What impressed you most about Babylon? The legendary blue walls, the astronomers who mapped the skies, or the lesson about losing the people's trust? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you and start a great discussion. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss the next episode of Rise and Fall of Civilizations. Every bit of your support is like a brick that helps us build a strong community of history lovers and strategy gamers.